Hey everyone, and welcome to our social studies. We are on lesson 6, section 6, and we're talking about Judy Heumann. And Judy Heumann was someone who helped disabled people. Now let's talk about who she was. So here's a picture of Judy Heumann. And Judy Heumann started the group called Disabled in Action. And Judy Heumann was born in 1947. 1947 takes us all the way back to the World War II era. So this would have been 2 years after World War II ended. And it says here that when she was a baby, she got sick with polio. So when we think about what polio is, let me just bring it up. So polio was a disease, and they needed to come up with a vaccine for it to help people get through it. And as you can see, polio had caused people to be very sick and disabled because of what was occurring in the body when they caught it. It was commonly shortened to polio. It's an infectious disease caused by the polio virus. So similar to what we've been dealing with the coronavirus, except for this one, caused people to be disabled forever. So let's look at what happened to Miss Heumann. So Judy Heumann, the disease hurt her legs. Judy would never be able to walk again. She had to use a wheelchair to get around. So when she caught the disease or the virus, it got into her body and it hurt her legs to the point that she could not walk and she needed to be in a wheelchair. She lived in Brooklyn, New York. And on her first day of first grade, her mother brought her to school. The principal would not let Judy in because she was in a wheelchair. Now, as crazy as that sounds, a lot of schoolhouses were not built to be to accommodate someone in a wheelchair. So maybe they had steps, maybe they didn't have ramps to go up, and they could easily say, "Hey, we can't do this because we don't have the ability to." The second part of that was that you could be discriminated against for being disabled. So you could have a disability and somebody could discriminate against you because of your disability. So a teacher came to Judy's house for a few hours each week instead. So instead of, they didn't have the internet back then, so they couldn't do like Zoom calls and videos like this. So they would send a teacher to her house since she couldn't go to the school. When Judy was in fourth grade, she was finally allowed to go to school. There, she met other disabled students. So, disabled means not being able to do an everyday thing, such as walk, in the same way that most people can. So, disability doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to walk. It just means that it's not being able to do something that other people do. Like you could have an arm that maybe doesn't work correctly. And that arm means that you now have a disability because you can't do the same things that everybody else can do. You might learn ways and skills to do some things that other people do, but you would have to fight through this disability, and that's why it's labeled that. So disabled means not being able to do everyday things like walk, talk, hear, or learn in the same way that most people can. Judy learned that the other disabled students felt the same way she did. Her legs didn't work right, but she didn't. She wanted to learn as much as any other student. So, the biggest fear is that if you have a disability, that people are going to treat you differently and maybe think that you're not as good as them because of your disability. And in this case, she's feeling that way, and she noticed that other people felt that way too that were disabled. So in college, Judy studied to be a teacher. At first, New York City wouldn't let her teach because she was in a wheelchair. So even though she studied to be a teacher, New York City wouldn't recognize her as being able to go to a school to teach. Judy went to court to win the right to teach. So what does that mean? She was going up against the state to say, we need to change the laws so that I, as a disabled person, can teach. And that's what she was fighting for. She was fighting for people like her that were disabled to be able to have the right to go into buildings and have ramps made so that they could access those buildings. So then in 1970, she formed a group called the Disabled in Action. And you could see here that this was 1970, so that would have been 51 years ago. She started the group to protect disabled people in New York from being treated unfairly. She was tired of seeing people discriminated against just because of their disability. The group has grown a lot since then. It helps disabled people across the country to live better lives. After creating Disabled in Action, Judy worked closely with the government of the United States. Now, why would she do that? She would need to work with the government to create rules and laws for businesses and cities that would have to recognize that there's people that are disabled and that they need to make sure that they're thinking about those people so that they have access to the same things that everybody else does. She helped she helped to make sure that people who are disabled have the same rights as everyone else under the law. She continued to fight for the rights of disabled people today. So you can see here, thanks to Judy, disabled students are treated more fairly. So when we go down here and we think of words that could go on a plaque for a monument for Judy Heumann, we can write them in the spaces below. Let's check it out. What did she do to improve her community? So you can see here, she started a group to protect disabled people from being treated unfairly. She started Disabled in Action, the group. There's so many different things you could say about it. She worked with the government to create new rules and laws. When did she do this? It was in 1970 that she did this. And now people around the country live better lives, even though they're disabled, because they can live more freely and they can have rules and laws that protect them from being discriminated against. So with those three things, you can pause the video if you need any of these notes. And that's it for today. Make sure you watch the video that I posted in the Google Classroom as well. Thanks so much. Pause it. Wait, palm it.